They wanted me to stay quiet, but one unexpected slip revealed a shocking family betrayal, one my brother thought would stay buried forever. I should have seen it coming. There was never a moment in my life where I wasn't reminded that Adam was the golden child. From the moment he was born, my parents treated him like a miracle, the embodiment of everything they had ever wanted in a son. I was just the afterthought, the quiet shadow that existed in the background. Still, I had held onto some shred of hope. A foolish, desperate hope that maybe, in the end, my parents would finally see me. That maybe, after a lifetime of being second place, I would be acknowledged as their son. When the lawyer read the will, that hope shattered into 1,000 pieces. Every single thing. Our family home, their savings, even the smallest sentimental items, was left to Adam. My name wasn't mentioned once. It was as if I had never existed. The humiliation burned deep. I sat in silence as Adam accepted it with an air of certainty, as if it had always been his right. There was no surprise on his face, no hesitation, just the smug satisfaction of someone who had won before the game had even started. For days, I tried to tell myself that it didn't matter. Money, property, none of it could change the years of indifference I had endured. I convinced myself that I was better off without their inheritance, that I had never needed anything from them anyway. But the betrayal lingered like a poison in my veins, a wound that refused to close. It wasn't until the wake that everything changed. A relative, loose-lipped and careless after one too many drinks, mentioned something I wasn't supposed to hear. My parents' will hadn't always looked like this. In fact, it had been changed just months before their deaths. A different will had existed before, one that had included me. The words settled in my mind like a bomb waiting to go off. If there had been another will, one where I was supposed to receive something significant, then someone had made sure that it disappeared. There was only one person who stood to gain from that change. Adam. A deep, simmering rage started to build in my chest. If he had manipulated, forged, or destroyed the original document, then this wasn't just favoritism. This was theft, and I wasn't about to let him get away with it. The thought of confronting Adam immediately burned at the edges of my mind, but I knew rushing into it wouldn't help. He would deny everything, act outraged, maybe even turn the rest of the family against me before I had the chance to prove anything. He had always been good at twisting the narrative, making himself the victim while I was cast as the bitter, jealous sibling. Instead of reacting, I started looking for answers. I went through every old email and letter my parents had ever sent me, searching for anything that might hint at their original intentions. There was nothing, no mention of a will, no indication of what they had planned. It made sense. They had never really included me in their decisions. So why would they have told me about something as important as their estate? But they had to have told someone. My first instinct was to contact the lawyer, the one who had read the will. If there had been a previous version, he would know about it. I sent an email first, keeping it professional and straightforward. I asked if my parents had ever made any prior arrangements regarding their estate. Days passed with no response. When I finally called, I was met with vague answers and an abrupt end to the conversation. Something was off. I wasn't imagining this. The hesitation in the lawyer's voice, the way he dodged my questions, it felt deliberate. If he had nothing to hide, why was he avoiding me? I wasn't going to let it go. Through an old family friend, I found out that my parents had originally drafted their will years ago, long before their health had started to decline. That version, the one no one seemed to want to talk about, had divided everything more fairly. I had been set to receive a substantial share, maybe not as much as Adam, but certainly not nothing. That will was gone now. The timeline of the changes made my stomach churn. The new version had been finalized just months before my parents died. They had been in and out of hospitals, heavily medicated, their minds not as sharp as they once were. It would have been the perfect time for someone to swoop in and take advantage. Adam. The realization settled over me like a weight. If he had manipulated them, if he had coerced or tricked them into changing their will while they were vulnerable, then this wasn't just about money. This was something much worse. I needed proof. The need for proof consumed me. Without it, I had nothing, just suspicions, just the bitter resentment of the forgotten child. If I was going to do something about this, if I was going to expose Adam for what he had done, I needed something concrete. I started with the lawyer. His reluctance to talk wasn't normal. He was either hiding something or had been pressured into silence. A simple records request wouldn't be enough. I needed to find a way into whatever files he was keeping on my parents' estate. That's when I remembered my mother's old habit of keeping everything. She was meticulous when it came to paperwork, keeping copies of every important document in a filing cabinet at home. If there had been an earlier will, there was a chance she had saved something. The house was still legally my parents', though Adam had already started treating it as his. I had only been back once since the funeral, long enough to see him walking through the halls like he had always owned the place. He hadn't bothered to change anything yet. Maybe he hadn't gone through everything. Maybe the old records were still there. I made my way there one afternoon, my heart pounding as I walked through the front door. The air inside felt different, emptier. It wasn't just the absence of my parents. It was the presence of Adam, lingering in every space like an unwanted stain. The filing cabinet was in my father's old office, tucked away in a corner behind his desk. I moved quickly, flipping through folders filled with bills, medical records, and tax returns. I nearly missed it, an old manila envelope wedged between thicker binders. The date on the tab sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. It was from 5 years ago. Inside was a copy of my parents' original will. My hands trembled as I scanned the pages. My name was there, clear as day, listed alongside Adam's. It wasn't equal, but it was fair. The house was meant to be split between us. The savings were to be divided, and I was supposed to receive a specific amount that would have been life-changing. None of that had happened. The last page held their signatures, along with a witness and the lawyer's seal. This was real. This was proof that my parents had once intended for me to have something. But then, at the bottom, stapled to the back, was another document, one I hadn't expected to find. It was a request for changes, dated only 3 months before their deaths. A formal petition to revoke the previous will and replace it with something new. Something Adam had orchestrated. The signature at the bottom was my father's, but something about it looked wrong. I stared at it, comparing it to the one on the original document. It was similar, but not the same. The lines were shakier, the letters slightly off. I had seen my father's handwriting my entire life. I knew what it was supposed to look like, and this wasn't it. A sick feeling settled in my stomach. If this signature was fake, then the entire revised will was built on a lie. I wasn't just cut out, I had been erased. And now I had the proof. The paper felt heavier in my hands than it should have. This wasn't just an old document, this was evidence. It was the difference between walking away with nothing and exposing what Adam had done. I stared at the shaky signature, the uneven strokes, the slight hesitation in the penmanship. My father had always written with confidence, his letters bold and deliberate. This wasn't him, or at least, not in any way that made sense. If he had signed this, then he had either been in a severely weakened state or, more likely, he hadn't signed it at all. I flipped through the papers again, checking the details of the new will. Everything my parents had owned was redirected to Adam. No mention of me. No acknowledgement that I had ever existed. It was like a complete erasure of my role in the family. Anger burned beneath my skin, but I forced myself to stay focused. I had the original will, but a signature discrepancy wasn't enough to prove fraud. I needed something undeniable, something that would hold up in court if it came to that. The lawyer had to have known. Whether he had gone along with it willingly or had been manipulated like my parents, he had facilitated the change. But there was someone else who might have seen it happen. The witnesses. All wills required them, and I needed to find out who had signed off on the forgery. I checked the last page of the altered document again. 2 names. One was unfamiliar, but the other was a distant relative, my mother's cousin, who had always been close with Adam. If anyone was willing to lie for him, it would be her. A nauseating realization settled over me. Adam hadn't just gotten away with this. He had planned it. The timing, the lawyer's silence, the altered will, none of this had happened by chance. He had known exactly what he was doing, and he had executed it so smoothly that no one had questioned it. My parents had been sick, vulnerable, and trusting. He had used that against them, and against me. I wasn't going to let him win. Carefully, I folded the old will and tucked it into my bag. If Adam had gone this far to cut me out, he wouldn't hesitate to get rid of any evidence that contradicted his story. I wasn't going to give him the chance. I took a deep breath and walked out of the office, feeling the weight of what I had just uncovered settle into my bones. The next step was clear. I needed a handwriting expert. And after that, I was going to make Adam regret everything. The weight of the document sat heavy in my bag as I left the house. Every instinct told me Adam would realize what I had found sooner or later. He wasn't careful in the way a normal person was careful. He was careful in the way someone who knew how to get away with things was. If he suspected I had even the slightest proof of his fraud, he would do everything in his power to make sure it disappeared. I wasn't going to give him that chance. The first thing I did was make copies. Not just one, but several. I scanned them onto a secure drive, printed physical copies, and even stored the files in cloud storage. If Adam thought he could make this go away, he was going to be in for a rude awakening. Next, I started looking into forensic document examiners. The signature was my biggest piece of evidence, but I needed someone to officially confirm what I already knew in my gut. The will had been tampered with. A certified handwriting analyst could compare my father's previous signatures with the one on the new will and determine if it was forged. Finding one wasn't difficult. Getting an appointment quickly was. These things took time, and I didn't have the luxury of waiting weeks for an official report. After calling several offices, I finally found one willing to expedite the process, for a price. I didn't care. While I waited for the analysis, I started digging into the second witness. The unfamiliar name on the will stood out like a red flag. If Adam had coerced or bribed someone, it was more likely to be this stranger than our mother's cousin. That relative had always been in Adam's pocket, but this other person? They had to have been brought in for a reason. I found nothing at first. The name wasn't common, but it also wasn't completely unique. A few searches through public records and social media gave me little to go on, but then I came across a business listing. The name belonged to an employee at the same law firm that handled my parents' estate. My stomach clenched. This wasn't just a coincidence. Adam had used someone connected to the lawyer, someone who could be pressured into signing whatever was put in front of them. It was all coming together. The timing, the secrecy, the sudden revision of the will right before my parents passed. Adam hadn't left anything to chance. He had orchestrated this with precision, ensuring that by the time I found out, it would be too late to do anything. Except he had underestimated me. I wasn't going to let him erase me. With proof mounting, I had to decide my next move carefully. A part of me wanted to storm into Adam's house and throw the evidence in his face, force him to admit what he had done. But that would be playing right into his hands. He would lie, manipulate, twist the story until I was the villain. He had always been good at that. I needed to be smart. Instead of confronting him, I started laying the groundwork. I reached out to a lawyer of my own, someone who specialized in estate disputes. I told them everything. The changes to the will, the suspicious timeline, the forged signature. They didn't promise me an easy case, but they did confirm that if the handwriting analysis proved fraud, I had a real shot at overturning the will. I wasn't just fighting for money. I was fighting for the truth. And I wasn't going to stop until everyone knew exactly what Adam had done. Waiting for the handwriting analysis felt like torture. Every day that passed without results made my anxiety grow. I knew I had to be patient, but I also knew Adam wasn't the type to sit still for long. If he had even the slightest suspicion that I was digging into this, he would act. He had always been good at staying ahead, making sure he was in control before anyone could challenge him. I had no choice but to stay ahead of him this time. Instead of waiting idly, I kept digging. My lawyer had already started looking into the legal side of things, but I needed more than just documents. I needed leverage. The problem was, Adam had always been careful. He had spent years cultivating the image of the responsible, successful son. If there were cracks in that facade, they wouldn't be easy to find. But everyone had secrets. It started with small things. I looked into his financial records, as much as I could access. He had always lived well, even when it didn't make sense. My parents had been generous with him, but their money hadn't been endless. And yet, Adam had never seemed to struggle. He had the best cars, the best vacations, the best of everything. The deeper I looked, the more questions I found. There were payments that didn't add up, business ventures that had quietly failed but had never been spoken about. He had debts, not massive ones, but enough to raise suspicion. If he had been in trouble financially, it would explain his desperation to secure everything for himself. But there was something else, something I hadn't expected. In my search, I came across a name I hadn't seen in years. A former friend of Adam's, someone he had once been close to before they had a falling out. I barely remembered the details, only that it had been ugly and that Adam had shut down any mention of it whenever it came up. Reaching out felt like a gamble, but I had nothing to lose. The response was immediate. The moment I mentioned Adam, the resentment was clear. Whatever had happened between them hadn't been forgiven. And then, without hesitation, they told me something that sent a cold chill through my veins. Adam had a history of manipulation that stretched far beyond what I had known. There had been other instances, situations where things had mysteriously gone his way, where money had changed hands, where people had been coerced into silence. He had always managed to keep it buried, always made sure no one could tie anything back to him. But the pattern was there. And now, It was all starting to make sense. This wasn't just about the will. Adam had been doing this his whole life. He had just never been caught. The more I uncovered, the more it became obvious. This wasn't a one-time betrayal. Adam had been getting away with things for years, quietly manipulating people and situations to work in his favor. He had perfected the art of playing the responsible son, the one everyone trusted, all while orchestrating his own victories behind the scenes. The will was just the final piece of his long-running game. I finally got the results from the handwriting analyst. I had been bracing myself for it, but seeing it in writing still made my stomach twist. The signature on the altered will did not match my father's natural handwriting. The analyst noted clear signs of forgery, shaky strokes, uneven pressure, inconsistencies in letter formation. Someone had tried to copy my father's signature, and they hadn't done a very good job. It was enough to challenge the will. I sent the report to my lawyer immediately, who confirmed that this was exactly what we needed. With this, we could take legal action. There was a process for contesting a will, and now I had the proof that something fraudulent had taken place. But a lawsuit would take time, and Adam wasn't the type to go down quietly. I needed to prepare for the fallout. The first step was securing my evidence. I made sure everything was documented, stored in multiple locations, both digital and physical. I also started reaching out to other family members, people who had always believed Adam's version of events without question. I didn't expect them to take my side immediately, but I wanted them to know the truth before Adam had a chance to twist it. Predictably, word got back to him. The first sign that he knew was the phone calls. At first, they were casual, disguised as attempts to check in. When I didn't answer, the messages became more aggressive. He accused me of stirring up drama, of disrespecting our parents' memory, of being greedy. It was laughable, considering he was the one who had stolen everything. Then, the threat started. They weren't direct. Adam was too smart for that. But the implication was clear. He made sure I knew how expensive legal battles could be, how long they could drag out. He reminded me of all the things he could say to make me look bad, how easy it would be to turn the family against me completely. But this time, I wasn't backing down. I had spent my whole life being pushed aside, overlooked, treated like I didn't matter. Adam had always counted on me walking away, on me letting things go. Not this time. I was going to make sure everyone knew exactly who he was. And when this was over, he wouldn't just lose what he had stolen. He'd lose the one thing he had always cared about the most. His reputation. Adam had always relied on perception. He built his life on being the dutiful son, the one who could do no wrong. That was his strength. And I was about to turn it into his greatest weakness. The moment I filed my lawsuit to contest the will, everything changed. Adam moved fast, spreading his version of the story before I could. The phone call started. Relatives pretending to be concerned but really just pushing his narrative. They acted like I was the problem, like I was the one tearing the family apart. It was infuriating, but I didn't care. I wasn't here to win their approval. I was here for the truth. Instead of engaging, I built my case. My lawyer wanted me to stay quiet, but I knew better. I reached out to people who had been close to my parents, planting seeds of doubt. I mentioned the suspicious timing of the will change, the lawyer's reluctance to talk, the way Adam had isolated them in their final months. Slowly, people started hesitating when they defended him. And then, the rail break came. One of my father's oldest friends reached out. He told me that, months before his death, my father had confided in him, worried about Adam's behavior, feeling pressured, like things were slipping out of his control. That was it. The final crack in Adam's carefully constructed image. The truth was coming. And this time, he wouldn't be able to stop it. Adam had spent his life making sure no one ever questioned him. He was too careful, too calculated. But now, the cracks were starting to show. With my father's friend confirming what I had suspected, I had everything I needed to push forward. My lawyer filed the official challenge against the will, citing undue influence and fraud. The handwriting analysis, the suspicious timeline, and now a witness who could testify that my father had felt pressured. It was enough to get the case moving. The backlash was immediate. Adam lashed out, calling me a disgrace, accusing me of being bitter and greedy. He painted himself as the grieving son, the one just trying to honor our parents' wishes while I dragged their legacy through the mud. His words spread through the family like wildfire, and soon, the messages flooded in. Some demanded that I drop it, that I let it go. Others, more quietly, admitted that they had always wondered about the will but had been too afraid to speak up. For the first time, Adam wasn't in control of the story. Then, something unexpected happened. The second witness, the unknown name on the fraudulent will, reached out through my lawyer. They wanted to talk. I didn't know what to expect, but what they revealed confirmed everything. They had been an employee at the law firm, pressured into signing as a witness without even reading the document. They hadn't thought much of it at the time, but once they learned about the lawsuit, guilt had set in. It was the final nail in Adam's coffin. The evidence was undeniable. The will had been altered under suspicious circumstances, with a forged signature and a coerced witness. Adam had taken advantage of my parents in their weakest moments, and now, everyone knew. The court battle was still ahead, but the damage to Adam's reputation was already done. He had spent his whole life making sure he was seen as the golden child. Now, he was just a fraud, and I was finally taking back what was mine. The moment the second witness admitted to being coerced, everything shifted. Adam wasn't just dealing with my accusations anymore. He was facing legal scrutiny. My lawyer wasted no time submitting their statement alongside the handwriting analysis and my father's friend's testimony. The case was no longer just about a contested will. It was about fraud. Adam must have realized things were slipping out of his control because his tactics changed. He stopped the aggressive phone calls, stopped trying to intimidate me. Instead, he started spinning a new narrative, one where he was the victim. He claimed he had only acted in my parents' best interest, that they had wanted him to take control of everything because they didn't trust me to handle it. It didn't matter. The evidence was stronger than his lies. As the court date approached, Adam started scrambling. His lawyers tried to stall, to delay the inevitable, but there was no stopping it now. The moment the handwriting expert testified that the signature had been forged, the judge's expression said everything. Adam's case was crumbling. In a last-ditch effort, he tried to settle. He offered to split things fairly if I dropped the case, but I refused. This wasn't just about money. This was about exposing him for what he had done. And then, the final blow landed. The court ruled in my favor. The fraudulent will was invalidated, and my parents' original wishes were restored. The house, the inheritance, everything Adam had tried to steal, was no longer his. He had spent his whole life making sure he came out on top. Now, he was left with nothing. But what hurt him most wasn't losing the money. It was losing his reputation. The family that had once idolized him now saw him for what he was. A liar, a manipulator, a fraud. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the forgotten one. I was the one who won. The ruling should have felt like a victory, but the moment the gavel struck, all I felt was exhaustion. Years of being dismissed, ignored, erased. This wasn't just about money. This was about proving that I had mattered, that I had never been as insignificant as my parents and Adam had made me feel. Adam left the courtroom without a word. No anger, no outburst, just a cold, hollow silence. But the damage was done. The family that had once blindly supported him now kept their distance. Some avoided me too, uncomfortable with the truth, unwilling to face how easily they had been manipulated. I didn't care. I hadn't done this for them. The legal process dragged on a little longer as assets were transferred back under my name. Adam fought to hold on to whatever he could, but the court's decision was final. The house, the savings, everything he had stolen, gone. The same way he had once erased me, he was now the one being erased. In the end, he left town. Maybe it was shame. Maybe it was the weight of losing. Or maybe, without my parents there to back him up, he had nothing left to cling to. I never spoke to him again. As for me, I moved forward. I kept what was rightfully mine, not out of greed, but because it was my parents' true intentions. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was living in Adam's shadow. I wasn't the forgotten child anymore. I was the one who fought back, and I won.